Good day, friends. Welcome to 2 Pixels Off. My name is Brad Hussey with my co-host, Michael Janda. How you doing today, Mike?
Super good. I was almost going to intro at the same time as you saying, hello, friends, because that's how you started all the ones. And I'm glad I didn't, because you said, good day, friends. It was like the first time you changed your opening.
I changed it,
opening statement. Yeah, you threw me off. I was like, whoa. We're getting crazy here.
Welcome to 2 Pixels Off, a podcast for creative entrepreneurs.
Good day, friends.
Good stuff. Yeah, I threw you off. I thought I'd change it up there. I took a moment and I took a beat and went, you know what? Greeting is different today. Preloaded a different greeting. Excited for today's episode. Before we do that, little housekeeping as usual. Give us your 5-star, most wonderful, splendid review on your favorite podcast app because that's always helpful. It's always nice. It makes me and Mike feel great. It's absolutely wonderful
if
feeling.
For nothing else, please pad our egos and give us some love.
Give us a little 5-star love. Yeah. And it helps with the algorithm too. You're at the mercy of the algorithm with these discovery engines, and we want more of you to discover us so that we can give you these episodes and this value. More of you, the more the merrier, I say.
Yes,
and
I agree.
Speaking of value, and I don't know how I'm going to tie this in, but a special shout out to our friends at Wix Studio for making this podcast and our conversations possible. I really, really like using Wix Studio. The more I use it, the more I absolutely love it for building sites quickly, but not only for that, but for the business tools, for the collaboration tools. Like it's not just a builder. That's the thing that I think needs to be really understood here is there's lots of really fun and trendy and good website builders out there, but that's where the buck stops essentially. Like that's what it is. Whereas Wix Studio is like a full web creation platform for agencies, enterprises, and busy freelancers. And the collaboration tools, the business tools, the management tools, the CMS, to responsive grid and AI functionality to the editor itself, it's a joy to create in the platform. And I'll find myself often skipping even designing in Figma and just doing it right in Wix Studio in the editor, because it's kind of like, why am I doing it here when I could just do it in Wix Studio? But it's wonderful. So check it out, wixstudio.com, and sign up. It's free. Start building some sites. You can build as many sites as you want for free. And then if you want to use it for your client work, obviously, you know how that works. You charge your clients and you sign up for a premium. It's great. So make sure to check them out. Now, Mike, our topic today, from my conversations I've had with you, in our group coaching sessions in the Creative Crew community, and from the videos that I've watched of yours, you talk a lot about phases in your production and in when you do web projects. There's a lot, you really talk about this concept of phased production and breaking things down into phases. I want you to help us understand more of why that matters, break it down. What is it? Why does it really matter? And how do we employ that in our own projects?
I love this intro. Thank you. Here's the deal. In the early days of my freelancing, I made this mistake. I made the mistake when a client would come to me and they would say, hey, we want you to design our logo and we need some business cards and stuff. We need a letterhead and we need whatever. This was back in the day when people actually designed that stuff and printed it. Not so much anymore. So I would give them a proposal. And in that proposal, it would say logo design, $1,200. Business card design, $400. Letterhead design, $300. And I was just pulling out kind of arbitrary numbers for each of these things. And then I would see a client take that and they would look at it and say, oh, okay, you know what? We changed our mind on the business cards and the letterhead. We just want you to do the logo. And then all of a sudden, my $2,000 project became a $1,200 project because they could just pick and choose things off of the list. Like I was giving them a menu. Here, which fish do you want to order? Oh, I don't want the fish. I want the chicken. Save myself $10. And so they started doing that. I did the same thing with websites. I would get a content plan from a client and I would put a price per page. The home page, $500. The about page, $300. The services page, $300. The contact page, $300. And so I would give a price per page, and then they would just go and look at it and say, you know what, we decided we don't need the testimonials page, so let's take that off, and let's take off the contact us page, and we'll just put the phone number on the bottom of the site or the top of the site or something. And all of a sudden, poof, my potentially $4,000 projects were getting cut down to $2,000 projects. I learned pretty quickly not to do that anymore. And what I started doing was this concept of phased production. I started still breaking down my prices for the client into more bite-sized pieces, but it was on stuff that they could not throw away. They could not throw it away. And let me give you an example, Brad, let's do an example of a website. And a website, if you're going to do a website and you're going to break it down by pages, you might say it's so much for the about page, so much for the home page, so much for the contact page, etc. You could break it down that way. Or you could still break it down, but break it down into 3 phases. This is an example. Phase 1 would be the website strategy phase, where you're going to do wireframes and you're going to do information architecture, create a site map, and do some content planning for the client. That's what's going to happen in the strategy phase. Now, you cannot pull out the strategy phase because it's critical to the overall project. You can't design the pages without having done the wireframes. You can't go to visual design. So if a client says to you, oh, well, we want to do this, but we don't want to do the strategy, you can say, no, we have to do the strategy. It's imperative to make the other rounds, the other phases successful. Phase 2 on this project would be the visual design. Now you have the wireframes. Now you're going to do the visual design. And that has a cost. Now you can't go to phase 3, the development of building the site, without having done the design. So each of these phases builds on each other. This gives you the ability, by breaking the website out into these 3 phases as an example, gives you the ability to say phase 1, the strategy phase, is $1,000. The design phase is $3,000 and the development phase is $3,000 and your total price is $7,000. And there's nothing in that scope that the client can pull out of the phases. Now they can still refine the scope to hit a budget and reduce the quantity of pages and things, but they can't throw away your process. And so once I started doing this, you regain control of the production flow of a project. I go down and break these phases into even more. On big websites, we would do 5-6 phases for a $100,000 website or a $200,000 website. But before we jump into examples like that, Brad, you said you do phase production as well. How do you go about it? And what are some of your thoughts on this strategy?
Yeah. So if there's 2 ways I can look at it, like my early stage career as a freelancer, and then how I do implementation work today, and wondering, do I do phased implementation or phased, execution? Do I do that? And so when I look back at the early days, absolutely. It just naturally is there. You got to do the planning. And then after the planning, because you got to figure out what are you building, then you do your lo-fi and then hi-fi mockups. We didn't call it that back then, or at least I didn't. I just said, I'm going to do Photoshop mockups after I draw you some boxes and lines.
Yeah.
Then I'm going to build the thing, So it was like plan, design, build. You can call it whatever you want. You can have cute names for it if you want, or just say it like it is. But it had the phases. And it really helps because then you can plan a schedule and a plan of getting it done and launched, and also payment plans if there's payment schedules and timelines. Now, how do I do it today? Because I don't do as many long, big engagement website or marketing projects. I do more intensive based projects. And if you've been listening to the episodes and you kind of hear about the type of implementation work I do outside of my content creation and whatnot, it's intensive based. It's done in 1 day intensives. And it could be done in 1 day website refreshes, landing pages, or done in 1 day ConvertKit or Kit intensives for email marketing. So it's kind of like a digital marketing intensive. It's like 1 day. So how do you do phased production on a 1 day project? It's still phased, actually. So the branding and the marketing of this intensive, the 1 day intensive, is all focused on the execution day, because that's exciting. That's like, it's all done in a day, because it really is. But what is done in a day? The execution is done in a day. The planning happens before, and there's a post process as well. So it's kind of 3 phases, really. And so it's the strategy, the discovery call. Someone books a call and goes, I saw your video, or I read your website, or I was referred to you, and it sounds exactly like what I need. To have some questions. Okay, we do that. We get it out of the way. Then I go, here, book your intensive. And then we get into the planning phase. So I send them questionnaire, a project management tool. It's all systemized and productized, and they go through the whole process. So that discovery phase on our kickoff call to all of the implementation, I get their copy, I get their brand, I get their messaging, their products, their pricing, their competitors, all of it. That happens before the intensive. It could happen 2 weeks before, it could happen 3 weeks before, it can happen the week before, depending on when they booked. I don't let them book so close to the day that planning can't happen, because that's what makes the day successful. Then there's execution day, where I do all the production in 1 single day. So it's just done. After that, it's handoff, training, and kind of letting them go. But there's like a warranty grace period and everything like that. So there's the 3 phases. And what they're paying for is the promise of the done in 1 day. Granted, there's more that happens on the shoulders of the done in 1 day, but the execution, which typically for a lot of digital design and digital marketing projects take a long time, take weeks or months. For me, for the type of work that I'm doing, it's 1 day. And so that sells well, it markets well, but there are 3 phases to that in my work.
Yeah, that's good. It's a good example. And I didn't face that because I wasn't selling my services that way. So I think that's a good example of how this same kind of logic can apply to anything that you're selling in the creative services world. It really, really helps. And we're going to talk about some of the reasons that it helps. You glossed over a few of them you were talking, Brad. We'll get into some of those details. If you don't do phases for a client, if you don't present phases to a client, and you sit down and they say, hey, we want you to build our website. And then you say, okay, I can build your website. It'll be $7,000. Yeah. That's the 1 phase version of a website. We want you to build website. Okay, I'll build website. That's the price. The client can easily look at that and say, whew, that seems like a lot, $7,000. Yeah. I just need a website. They don't understand all of the work that goes into it. Now, if we break down that same website and we break it into, let's say, 5 phases, which we would do at my agency. These were our standard 5 phases. Phase number 1, and I would take a client through it like this. Actually, I'll just do it like you're the client. The client comes to me and says, hey, we want you to do a website for us. And I would say, okay, well, our website projects start on the higher end, $50,000, on the lower end, $30,000. Let me tell you about the process that we use to execute on this website. We break our websites projects down into phases. Phase number 1 is a strategy phase. It's called information architecture. We're going to create a site map, which is kind of an organizational structure of all the pages that we need to create for the site. We're going to do content planning. We're going to understand what's going to go on to each of these pages in copy, in videos, in features. We're going to define all of that inside of this first phase. Sometimes we'll do things like a customer journey. What path do we want the visitor to your site to go through to achieve the thing you're trying to accomplish with this website? We're going to define the goals and the objectives. This is all the strategy work that goes into a website. Now, after the strategy work is done, we're going to go and do UX design, user experience design. This is phase number 2. And that user experience design is a wireframing process. It's like the blueprints that an architect draws for a house. We do the same type of work for a website. We create blueprints, low fidelity, box and wire blueprints that give us the guide so that we can do the visual design on it after we're finished. So that's phase 2. We're going to do that blueprint phase or the wireframe UX design phase. Then we're going to go to phase 3. And this is where things get fun and all the clients want to jump to here, but we've put in the foundation. And then in phase 3, we can actually do the visual design. We're going to create mood boards. We're going to create a style. We're going to find the actual images and the button styles and the colors and all the things. The website pages will all look like they're ready to go. The visual design will be done. And it's kind of the exciting thing where you start seeing things come together. And then we go into building the beta site, this development website that is oftentimes doesn't have the finished copy in it, but we know the copy that's coming, the content that's coming. We'll build all the pages that were approved in phase 3. We'll build them all in phase 4 so that they're all clickable and ready. And then we go into phase 5 when we integrate all of the final copy, the final images, the final headlines, all the final stuff goes in there in phase 5. We integrate it all in. And then when it's approved by you, we launch the site and we take it through our quality assurance testing. Now, those are the 5 phases of our websites. Now, websites that we do on the starting end of a website like yours is $50,000. On the lower end, it's around $30,000. Is that a budget range that you're comfortable in? Now, what happens, Brad, when you take a client through those 5 phases and you explain that, all of a sudden you get to phase 3 and they're sitting there thinking, oh, I guess this isn't going to be $500. Oh, this isn't going to be $12,000. Oh, this isn't going to be $20,000. They start ratcheting up their price while you're taking them through the explanation of the work that you're actually going to do. You're training them to understand the level of effort that you're going to put into their project so that they become comfortable with spending the money that it's going to take to do it right. And sometimes you'll get pushback from clients that are cheap clients. Oh, well, we don't have that much. You can go and refine the scope. Let's bring down the scope. Let's tighten it. Or you can say, be careful of anybody who's going to do it for cheaper because you can run into some problems. You have a humongous site here and people who can do it for cheaper there's some risk in that. You usually get what you pay for.
That's what I was going to mention there is one thing that you're doing there is there's almost twofold. You're retraining the client's expectations and you're doing a good solid for the creative industry, for the design world, for those agencies out there who might get this client one day. If it's not you, you're ordering their expectations of what goes into these projects. Because the more they think it's a $500 for a website and no one checks them on that and helps them understand what really goes into a good project, then they'll perpetuate that issue and go to the next person and cause them grief. And then maybe that client, that web designer or that freelancer or that agency isn't very strong at helping at saying no or at helping them understand what goes into a project. So it's almost like you get to do a solid for the design world, for the creative industry, and go, here's what goes into the project, and you break it down, and you go, our project's the high end, 50,000 over the course of 3 months, or on the low end, 30,000. Mm-hmm. And here's why. Here's what goes into it. Then you're reestablishing those expectations. Now they might guffaw at you and just like, they're not interested, but hey, at least now you help them to realize like, you're not going to be a good fit. Maybe they go to the next person and that person who's like going to charge them 8,000 and they're really nervous about it because it's a high price. Now they go, you know what? Like, yeah, okay. I understand there's a lot that goes into these projects. Am I correct? And you're doing a solid for the next guy in line, right? But it also helps anchor their expectations if they do go with you. And they might have had this budget that they thought, I don't know, maybe it's a couple grand for a website. And you go, look, you can spend that, but be careful if you do spend that, because you're not going to get this. It's not possible. It's just not possible. And if it is possible and the person charging you $2,000 says they're going through each of these things, you know darn well they're just glossing over all of it. And none of it is even worth anything. And all they're really doing is just giving you a production ready site. They're not thinking about anything else. There's no discovery. There's no planning. There's no science and research that goes into this. It's just, I made you a pretty layout and charged you for it. If that's what you want, sure, have at it. In fact, just go and do it yourself. Find a great template. Go do it yourself. Say, I've just saved you $2,000. But if you're trying to do this right, this is how it works. And if you're business, if you're established serious business and you want to invest in this, this is the direction. So it's up to you. Yeah. You get to be boss there. You get to be chief big dog.
Yeah. Let's bring this down to, because you did mention some of these cheaper clients and me giving $50,000, $30,000 ranges and stuff. That's not in harmony with what some people are doing in their career. I wasn't at the start. A big project, my biggest project ever in the early days was like a 30 grand project. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the biggest thing I've ever seen. And, a few years later, we're doing $300,000 projects. It all levels up over time. But if you're still in this early phase where a $3,000, $5,000, and $8,000 budget is something that is appealing to you, don't give them 5 phases. Let's tailor the phases to the size of the project. If the client has a $5,000 budget and they have a 5-page website or a 6-page website, do it in 3 phases. Give them a strategy phase, give them a sitemap in that strategy phase, and a little content outline of, okay, on the 5 pages, roughly what are we going to have on those? Then go give them a 1 pass at wireframes and then a visual design. And then go and just build the 5 pages, but build them on a template of some kind, an engine, a pre-built module or something that you pull in. Wix Studio has tons of those that you can just drag in the module and skin it to your style, change the typography, change the images, add the colors, change the button style, and make it match your client's design style. And yes, you can hit a $5,000 budget on things like that, or a $3,000 budget, but you should still give them phases. I just believe wholeheartedly in the phasing of projects because it will help you tier up those prices over time. You're going to get more comfortable presenting the volume of work or the level of effort that you have to do to create this project for the client. You're going to get more comfortable talking about it. You're going to start realizing that this shouldn't be costing $3,000 for the client. You're going to start being able to sell the client that pays $3 now. You're going to sell them on $6 the next time. You're going to sell the next client on $12. All of a sudden, you're going to start breaking those plateaus of pricing where you realize, wow, that is an expensive thing. I can't be doing these $5,000 websites. I did an audit of website projects at the agency I sold to. I can't remember if I talked about it here, but we found that $28,000 was our number of how much it cost us as an agency to create the average website that we were producing for a client. 28 grand. That was our break-even price on a website project for a client. So we had a full-time bid writer, and I went to him after I did this analysis. I was like, hey, dude, no matter what any of the other partners say on what the price is going to be, if you ever have somebody tell you that the price is anything less than like 32 grand, come see me. And I'll handle explaining to the partner that we can't do that deal for that client that you just promised them. We just can't do it. We're not going to make any money on that project. So you start to realize the real cost that goes into some of this work that we do for clients. It oftentimes is much more than what we're trying to charge them.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's easy for an agency to, well, maybe it's not easy for an agency, but agencies have to know that, especially because if you're undercharging, you're going to quickly realize you can't make payroll, you can't pay your expenses, you've got an office building that you're leased, you've got, your golf trips with potential clients, you've got, minglers that you're setting up in the city so that you can network with your staff and other agencies, and you've got retreats and everything, like pizza parties, sushi parties, whatever it is. Like you're going to quickly realize like we can't afford this. And why is that? Is because on average, the project that we take on, we're actually losing money. So by doing the thing that we said we're going to do, we're actually killing our business. So you'll learn that pretty quickly in an agency. Freelancers can scooch by that for a longer period of time without realizing there's a problem. It's almost like a slow leak or the whole death by 1,000 cuts sort of thing, where you can kind of go a long time before you're like, this is not working. And I don't know if it's been working for a while. And you can go probably a couple years in, like into the hole before you're like, it's just a bad situation I find myself in. And that's why I always say, like, you got to find that floor even for you as a freelancer, because you have costs. No, albeit they're more lean than an agency. If you got 10, 20 person agency with a building and all that stuff, that's going to be expensive. But hey, okay, look at your numbers. What's your office? Maybe it's your home. Maybe you bought a bigger home because you wanted a studio in it. Okay, so what's the mortgage? What's your utilities? You know, what is your internet cost that you've upgraded your internet to handle all of your, you know, the work that you're doing? What is your office costs? What are your materials? Okay, now what does it cost for you to pay your family? Meaning, like, how much does it cost to live? And how much do you pay yourself in order to live and to put money away in your savings and investments and whatnot? And what does it cost? You know, really at the end of the day, there's two expenses for a solopreneur. You've got your personal expenses and you've got your business expenses. Your business, if your business is what pays for all of it, needs to know what those numbers are. So you go, okay, personally, this is how much I'm paying us. So that's our personal cost to live and to thrive, ideally. Okay, got that monthly number. And this is the business. All of the business credit card expenses and subscriptions and taxes and everything. That's that number. You put those two together and you go, that is our break-even monthly number. You can break that down into if you do 4 projects a month, if you do 1 project a month, if you do 10 projects, you need to have your average project value and go, costs us $14,000 a month to run. Every project that I take on, I do 3 a month, break that down into 3. You know, you can do some easy math and say every project needs to be a minimum of $5,000. And that's break even. So anything I take on, if I'm doing 3 of them that month, it needs to be minimum $9,500. And I know that I'm in the green, you know, and I'm doing well by me and my business and my family. You got to do it for solopreneurs as well. It's just your numbers are more lean than an agency with payroll, but you have to know it. And that's why it's important when you come into pricing. And so tying it into your phases and everything, communicating the value, breaking it into phases to understand why it's $9,500 if you're just a solo freelancer, or $95,000, you know, if you're an agency. Communicating why that number is the case, because you have break-even numbers, and there's a lot of value that goes into this. So if you want us to do it, this is what it is.
Yeah. A lot of times I hear people saying, oh, I want to find better clients. I need to find higher paying clients. How do I find higher paying clients? Start by acting like a freaking better business. Yeah. Start by breaking your projects into phases and presenting those phases to clients and walking them through the level of effort that you're going to put into their project. And they're going to see more value in you, and it's going to allow you to start tiering up and closing better paying projects. But a lot of people who are like, oh, I just got to find better clients. I got to find higher paying clients. And then they just keep operating in an unstructured manner, like they were before. Start acting like the business you want to be, not the business you are right now. That's a Mike Janda quote I've shared in a bunch of places. Start acting like the business you want to be, not the business you are right now, and breaking your projects into phases and walking your client through those phases inside of your sales process is a hugely effective way to start acting like a bigger business than what you might feel like right now at this moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, okay. One of the things I love about phased production is it makes for clarity on payment schedule. So let's say we broke a project into 3 phases. You could easily say to the client, okay, we're going to invoice you with 3 invoices on this project. The first invoice will be due at the start of production. And that one, let's say it's a $10,000 project. Invoice number 1 is $2,500. That will get us started. Invoice number 2 is a bigger one. That's $5,000. And we will invoice that after phase 2 is completed. So in this conversation, we would invoice number 1 at the start of strategy, phase 1. Then we would go to phase 2 and do the design work. And then after that's approved, we get the $5,000 payment. And then that leaves us $2,500 left at the end. And we will invoice that to you upon completion of the project and approval upon launch. Now you have 3 logical milestones that are not tied to specific dates. They're not tied to months. They're not tied to specific deliverables. They're tied to project phases and their approval. Yeah. Now, there are a lot of little deliverables inside of those phases that get approved from the client, but you have a clear milestone of when am I going to invoice my $5,000? One of the things that I highly recommend for people is leave a small invoice for last. You've done the majority of the work. Don't leave the majority of the money for the end of the engagement. I hate 50-50 billing, and some people teach it. I think it's the worst thing ever. We'll invoice you 50% at the start and 50% upon completion. That is the stupidest thing in creative services that is commonly used. I hate it. Because by the end of the project, you've done 100% of the work and you've only collected 50% of the money. And you know what happens? The client won't approve the final. They're like, won't approve it, won't approve it, won't approve it. You can't invoice them. Now the project that was supposed to be 6 weeks is 6 months long, and you've done and carried 100% of the cost of producing the work, and you can't invoice because the client is dragging their feet on the very last thing. If you break it into 3 payments, like I just did, do payment 1, easy to get started. Payment 2, the lion's share, bigger payment. And payment 3 is the last little morsel on top. And then if they kick it down the road 6 months, you're not sitting there on this huge invoice. If a client only wants 2 payments, then invoice 75 at the start and 25 at completion. Do it that way. Stop the 50-50 billing nonsense. That is so bad for you. It's not even funny. I hate that.
And I think another thing to maybe even play maybe devil's advocate on the 50% or final payment on launch, that's a hard one, because I know that you and I have been on a group coaching call in the creative crew, and one of the members mentioned the issue that he had with that was launch is a moving target, and the client tends to push the goalpost, and they go, well, it's not launched yet. It's like, it's not, or on completion, you know, it's like, that's a big one, is final payment upon completion. You're like, okay, did you define completion, or did you let the client define completion? Because they might go, well, it's not done yet, because now they're going into the nitty gritty to shout out our previous episode. They're just in the nitty gritty and they'll never come out of it. And they go, oh, it's just, there's a little bit here. Or you know what? We fired that staff member who is the account manager for you, and we have to hire them and onboard them. It's going to take a bit, and we're doing our vacation and our annual retreat. So we're gonna have to push this back. And so we can't settle that up just yet. But once we get back and get that new person in, then there's always excuse. And then once weeks and months, and even in this case with this call, it was a year that went by since like the project was completed, in like that, you'll never get paid. You just won't get paid.
You'll never get it. You're going to get screwed. Yeah.
So don't say your final payment, even if it's 25%, which it should be the smaller number, upon completion. Just say before release of the final project, or before we hand over the keys, or whatever it is. Like, don't create a muddy definition of what completion is. In fact, don't even say that. Just say, if it's a scheduled, like if you're doing phases and date-based payment terms, and you know the phases, you could say, this is let's call it a 3-month project. You know, payment 1 is, 25% or 20%, and it's due literally before we start. And then you've got your bulk, the lion's share in the middle. That is 4 weeks in, and it's due on that, regardless of, you could just have a payment date and say it's due on this day. And then you could go, and our launch and the completion, we are scheduled to have it be done in this month. It might push back, it might be a little bit delayed based on client deliverables and whatnot, but final payment is due that day. And, you could do it like that, or it could be you don't get anything live, launched, handed over. It's all in our server. It's all in our account, whatever it is, until daddy gets final check.
Yeah.
So, say it however you want, but that's how I would do it.
Or you could leave it really small. And I'll give you an example. We had a $120,000 website that we did. And I think and it was 5 phases. And I think by launch, we probably invoiced them 6 invoices across those 5 phases, maybe 7 invoices. Because it was like an 8-month, 10-month project. It was just this long website project. By the time we got to the very end, the client had probably paid $115,000 and the last invoice was $5,000. And you know how I feel about $5,000 on a $115,000 or $120,000 project? It feels like $500 in the whole scheme of things. And I don't mind if the client drags their feet and they don't approve and they whatever, and they need to give a copy and they need to final approval and their mom is visiting, so they can't write the check and whatever kind of nonsense story they give you. I don't care, because the amount of money in the whole scheme of the project is so small. Yeah. So don't be afraid to leave the very last invoice to small. Let's take it on a $10,000 project. $10,000 project, invoice $3,000 at the start and $6,000 at the second invoice and $1,000 at the end.
Yeah.
You can take the risk on $1,000. You can take the risk of the client dragging their feet and not approving and whatever. Mm-hmm. You're not going to get all bent out of shape if the 6-week project ends up taking 3 months, because you've collected lion's share of the money. So keep that in mind in how you structure these things. And don't be afraid. I'm getting riled up, Brad. Don't be afraid to break your projects out into freaking more invoices. This is the stupidest thing too. Oh, my clients don't like more than 2 invoices. It's not for your client to choose. It's your freaking business. You're the one doing the work. You tell the client how you're going to invoice it. Don't be afraid to have 3 invoices. Oh, well, my client won't like that. So let them go work for somebody else and screw them on the payment. But you can break yours down into 3 invoices if you want. I had $10,000 projects that had 3 invoices in them. I never had a client complain to me, oh, this is a lot of invoices. They do not care about that. And it's not theirs to choose. Yeah. It's yours to choose. It's your business. You set the terms. You're selling the thing. You set the terms.
Yep. You could break it into sprints. You could do weekly sprints, and you could say, we put a credit card on file and we charge weekly. And the faster you are at getting what we need, it usually results in 20% less sprints. And the slower you are, and you don't have to say it like that, but you could say it in some way where they understand what you're saying. If you're fast, it usually results in our experience in 20% less sprints. If you're slow, it usually results in 20% more sprints. I think this is going to be an 8 sprint project, so therefore 8 weeks, and we break them into sprints. That's what we call them, because objectives get done by the end of the week. Payment is charged to your credit card, on the Monday morning or the Friday afternoon or whatever it is, the Friday morning, and it's just what it is. And as soon as the engagement is done, the project is completed and the sprints end, and there's no more payments. You could decide however you want to do it, and it's your terms. You get to decide. And the client's like, no, we do it like this. Now, if you're working for a huge corporate client, or you're subcontracted out by an agency and you're essentially part of their payroll as part of their vendors, then you're kind of at the mercy of them sometimes. But if it's like you're working with clients and it's your own clients, you're like, this is how it works. This is how we do it. And it's been working and it works well. And this gets all of it out of the way. No, I'm not going to take, cash, at the end of the month. It's like, this is how we do it.
Typically, the big clients aren't the problem in this. The big clients, I never had a big client say, no, we don't want 3 invoices. I never had them say that. I never worried about a big client, a Google. I never worried that they were going to not pay me. I never worried. I didn't wait to start the project until I had the money in hand. First, pay the first invoice before we'll start. We will not start unless you've paid the $3,000 starter invoice. I never did that. They sign. As soon as they sign, we're starting, because I know that Google is going to pay me. Mm-hmm. I know that it's going to come through. And sometimes it takes 30 days for it to process through their accounting churn. Sometimes it takes that. But I never worried about it. So each client is a little different. The big clients don't have this problem of kicking it down the road typically and not approving, and it's never done and it never launches. Most often the big clients work toward a deadline, give you the things you need, provide the revenue on your invoices when you invoice it, or in your terms, 30-day net or whatever. You get the flow. Big clients too. We did a ton of work for these big clients. Our $500,000 project we did for Kraft Foods. We probably had 6 invoices in that. 6 invoices spread over like 8 months or 6 months of time. They were big invoices. It was great. I loved it, but it was spread over time, and nobody complained about 6 invoices. Now, it just doesn't happen. I think people get caught up in that. I've heard people say, "Oh, that's a lot of invoices." Screw that, man. I'll send as many invoices as I want. Yeah. I'm not going to be ridiculous, but if I want to invoice my client 4 times on a $10,000 project, then I'm going to tell them that that's how I'm going to break it out. And maybe I break it out into 4 sprints, and that's how they pay it. Yep. And they pay it at the end of each week on a credit card, like Brad was saying. I mean, you set the terms. That's the point. It's your business. You set the terms.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm mad. Exactly.
You're mad. This is an angry episode.
Mad. I'm so mad. Okay. Let's wrap this up with just a couple of phases. Like, we talk a lot about websites, but this phasing still works for things like print projects. A print project, instead of just saying, okay, we're going to design the cover of your brochure, and then we're going to design the 10 inside pages on the brochure, and then we're going to manage the printing of that, and you give the price for each of those things. Instead, break it into phases that they cannot pull out. Like phase 1, research and design concepting. Phase 2, the visual design of the brochure. And phase 3, the pre-press production. You can break it out. The client can't pull any of those things out. They can't stiff you on the money. And you're still going to explain to them clearly the level of effort that goes into the work. Another one I'll give you as an example is designing a logo. Designing a logo. This is the same kind of thing. Phase 1, research and logo design concepting. These are rough sketches that just are some idea starters. And we do some mood boards, and we look at logos together, and we talk about what's going to work for your target audience and for your brand and differentiate you from the competitors and blah, blah, blah. We do this research phase. And then we go in and actually design the logo based on the feedback you gave us during the research phase. And then we do logo production, where we take that logo and we turn it into all of the different formats that you need. We export all the different file formats. We do the vertical version, the horizontal version, blah, blah, blah. That's phase 3. So phase 1, 2, 3, research, design, production. You can break it out that way. What I like about this too, Brad, that I didn't articulate very clearly, is that instead of giving your client a one lump price of $9,000 for your logo project, now we're giving them a $3,000 phase 1, a $3,000 phase 2, and a $3,000 phase 3. It helps them itemize the items in their head and see, oh, I see. There's a lot more that goes into this. I'm not just paying one lump sum, $9,000 for this thing. I'm actually paying for the work that's going into this over time. So it helps soften the blow of the big invoice. We do this all the time. You go to a restaurant and you're like, you and your wife go out in your new boots. I haven't ripped on your boots for a few things, but it's winter. It's winter in July in Canada, and Brad and his wife are heading to the restaurant in their new boots, and they sit down, and Brad orders the chicken and his wife gets the salmon, and then they get their invoice or their receipt at the end, or their bill, and they're like, what in the freaking, this is $78. How did we get to $78? So what do? They look at the itemized version of the receipt that says, oh, your drinks were $5 each. And you ordered 4 of them. You had an appetizer. Your avocado toast was $13 or whatever. And all of a sudden, Brad's like, oh, I see how we got to $78.
Yeah.
But if they would have just shown up and said, okay, here's your bill for $78, there's no itemization for Brad to go and justify in his own head the price that he's going to pay for that $78. And he doesn't know where it comes from. Your clients do the same thing. You present them with a $5,000 proposal as one lump sum. They can easily, without explaining to them the phases you're going through and the work that's going into it, they can easily look at it and say, that seems really expensive. But you explain the phases and they say, oh, I get why it's so much. I want that process because I can see how that process is going to yield the best results for me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it works in your favor. It works in your favor to do that. And so I think the summary here really is breaking your projects into phases is going to work in your favor. It works in the client's favor. And if you don't do it, you probably should. So especially if you are charging, more than $5,000, essentially. I think there's like a benchmark where a client will pay, in full up to a certain amount. And I mean, it depends on the client. If you have a huge client, like they can drop massive dollars in one payment. But I think as a general rule of thumb, once you reach like that $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 threshold, you should start breaking your payment schedule into phases. But you should, even with the small projects, like I mentioned when I do these one-day intensives, those still have phases. Communicate the phases, and that helps the client to understand what goes into the project, but also it helps them to understand the price, especially if it's a premium price. And it makes it much easier for you to sell your project, to sell the value. And at the end of the day, if the client doesn't choose you, at least you trained them and made them, exposed them to what a good project looks like and how it's broken down, so that they might question the next cheap project, or they might be more likely to pay a little more on the next project for the freelancer down the line who's maybe just getting in the game. So I think phasing your projects is just good organizational practice, but also really good practice for you to help you and your clients. So
one thing I think it does, Brad, too, is it improves your referral inflow.
Likelihood.
And it does this because the client who decided, oh, that's too expensive for me, knows that you're offering a higher end deliverable, a higher end process. And so the people they refer to you in the future will be referred like this. Well, I met with Brad and he was freaking amazing. He's a little more money than we could afford, but your business probably can afford him. And if I had the budget, I would have used him because his process was so much better. Now, all of a sudden, you're getting a higher quality lead coming to you because you're changing the perception that people have of your business, because you're telling them what your business even does. And it's not design logos. It's take people through a methodical production process that delivers a logo that resonates with a target customer and represents their brand effectively. That's what you're doing. But your client doesn't know that you're doing that unless you start talking that way and taking them through this methodical process that you're going to use to execute on their project.
Yep, absolutely. And with that, I hope that you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, which I think you did, leave us a good review on your favorite.
You think? Hey, we're going to put words in your mouth. You loved it.
You loved this episode. I loved it. 5 stars. Go ahead. Just put that in your favorite podcast app and do us a solid. Special thanks to our friends at Wix Studio for making conversations like this possible. Go check them out, wixstudio.com. And until next time, this pixel is out.
This pixel off.